Electric tension rippled through the air inside the House Oversight Committee chamber, as Speaker Mike Johnson, in a rare and personally significant appearance before the panel, wrapped up his prepared remarks with the air of a man cloaked in moral conviction. The emergency hearing, called to examine the implosion of government funding negotiations, had been fraught from the first strike of the gavel. Johnson spent those opening hours mounting an impassioned defense of his last-minute decision to derail a long-awaited bipartisan border security accord, an agreement that had taken months of laborious negotiation to piece together. "Let me be absolutely clear," Johnson proclaimed, his voice firm with the calculated cadence that had become a trademark since assuming the Speaker's gavel. "My decision was guided exclusively by matters of constitutional integrity and substantive policy, not politics, not pressure." He paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the air before continuing. "Any implication of hidden influence or undisclosed arrangements is not only false, it's a cynical attempt to distract from genuine policy disputes that demand serious debate." For nearly 40 uninterrupted minutes, Johnson had maintained that posture of unflinching principle. His remarks painted the scrapped border deal as fatally flawed, and his own resistance as a defense of constitutional balance rather than a symptom of political expedience. He dismissed allegations of secret assurances to powerful donor networks as baseless conspiracy theories unworthy of this chamber. His voice never wavered. "I have always acted with complete transparency," he insisted, as his allotted time drew to a close. "My choices arise solely from constitutional fidelity and a commitment to the American people, never from hidden interests or factional demands." As questioning began, expectations settled into familiar grooves. Republican members nodded approvingly, ready to laud Johnson's steadfastness. Democrats prepared to denounce his reversal, though few believed anything new would emerge. Then the clerk called the next name. Representative Jasmine Crockett of Texas adjusted her microphone. First-term Congresswoman had developed a quiet reputation on Capitol Hill for her meticulous preparation and unnerving ability to produce evidence at exactly the right moment. Her cross-examinations during previous hearings had left witnesses scrambling. But no one in the room, not even her colleagues, fully anticipated what was about to unfold. "Mr. Speaker," Crockett began, her voice soft but commanding, "I appreciate your articulation of the constitutional principles you believe guided your decision." She paused deliberately. "Before diving into specific communications, I'd like to establish a factual timeline." The screen behind her flickered to life, displaying a simple slide, dates, quotes, and shifts in tone. "On January 12th, you described yourself as cautiously optimistic about the border framework," she began. "On January 25th, you praised its progress, saying you were encouraged by bipartisan cooperation. Yet, by February 2nd, you declared the exact same framework dead on arrival. Is this timeline accurate?" Johnson hesitated only briefly before responding. "Broadly, yes," he said with measured control, "though that account lacks the contextual developments that occurred in the interim." Crockett nodded calmly, turning another page in her notes. "Then let's add some context." She lifted a new document. "According to official visitor logs, on January 34th, the day before your reversal, you hosted a private meeting with representatives from the Heritage Foundation, joined by 3 high-value donors who had publicly opposed the border compromise." Gasps rippled through the gallery as she placed the registry on display. "Can you clarify what was discussed during that meeting that so dramatically altered your position within 24 hours? Johnson's eyes narrowed, his confidence momentarily faltering before he collected himself. "Congresswoman, I meet with countless policy experts and advocacy groups. That particular meeting was a general policy dialogue, not focused on the border framework." Crockett's next move was surgical. "That's fascinating, Mr. Speaker," she said evenly, "because I've also obtained the agenda circulated to attendees before that meeting." The projection changed again, this time revealing a document titled, "Strategic Coordination, Terminating the Border Compromise." The audience stirred audibly. Johnson's name appeared clearly listed among the participants. "This agenda, distributed by Heritage Action one day prior, outlines an objective to dismantle the framework," Crockett said, her tone still controlled. "It also references, directly, confidential assurances regarding leadership positions. Would you like to explain what those assurances entailed?" The room erupted in low whispers, and the faint clatter of reporters typing furiously. But Crockett wasn't finished. "Perhaps even more troubling," she continued, "is this email sent from your official government account at 9:47 p.m., following that same meeting." She clicked once more, and the words appeared on the screens flanking the room. The subject line read, "Assurance obtained." She read aloud. "As outlined in our meeting, I can confirm the border framework will not proceed. In return for the financial commitments discussed, I will frame the withdrawal publicly as a matter of constitutional concern rather than policy disagreement. Please delete this correspondence after review and maintain our coordinated narrative." The chamber exploded. Reporters whispered. Members gasped. The speaker's face blanched, then flushed crimson. That's absurd," Johnson sputtered, his composure slipping for the first time all afternoon. "That message is fabricated." "Where did you get that?" "The email," Crockett replied evenly, "was provided by a recipient who felt morally obligated to disclose it." She held his gaze. "And, for the record, its authenticity has been verified by 2 independent digital forensic experts. The metadata traces directly to your official congressional system. The committee has received the full digital files, complete with headers and authentication logs." Johnson's denials came rapid and uncoordinated now, his once measured tone giving way to frustration. "That's not possible." Crockett raised a hand slightly, silencing him without raising her voice. 3 other recipients of this same message," she continued, "have submitted sworn affidavits confirming its authenticity. Each has also provided supplementary correspondence outlining specific financial pledges made in exchange for your decision to end the border deal." She placed another document on the table. "Those materials have already been referred to the appropriate ethics and campaign finance authorities." What followed was a visible transformation, the collapse of the speaker's carefully built facade. Moments earlier, he had exuded confidence, portraying himself as the guardian of constitutional integrity. Now, facing evidence that contradicted every word, he appeared cornered, defensive, diminished. Political observers would later describe the moment as one of the most profound public reckonings in modern congressional history. The power dynamic in the room had inverted completely. Each attempt by Johnson to reclaim control, to cast doubt or demand context, only deepened the gravity of Crockett's revelations. Procedural confusion swept through the dais as Republican members scrambled to raise objections, but the damage was done. What began as a routine oversight session had become a spectacle of accountability unlike anything Washington had witnessed in years. Before we delve deeper into this seismic confrontation that seized national attention, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the notification bell to stay updated on our in-depth breakdowns of major oversight moments, often ignored by mainstream coverage. Now, let's return to the scene that transformed Representative Jasmine Crockett's measured precision and documented proof into a political thunderclap. One that left Speaker Mike Johnson visibly shaken, his once impenetrable image cracking under the weight of evidence. Crockett's rise to that defining instant was anything but conventional. Elected to Congress in 2022 after just 1 term in the Texas state legislature, the 41-year-old attorney had swiftly carved out a name for herself as one of the chamber's most exacting investigators. Her background wasn't in politics, it was in the courtroom. Years of litigating complex civil rights cases had honed her instincts for documentation, verification, and unflinching precision. She built her career on methodical evidence gathering, assembling timelines, cross-referencing statements, and letting the facts dismantle pretense. Her transition to Congress didn't change that approach. What others saw as political theater, she treated as a trial record in progress. Speaker Mike Johnson, on the other hand, had arrived at power through an entirely different path. His ascent relied less on meticulous reasoning and more on ideological loyalty and donor alignment. As a relatively junior lawmaker unexpectedly vaulted into the Speaker's chair after a string of failed leadership bids by more senior members, Johnson had crafted a persona grounded in intellectual conservatism and principled restraint. To the public, he appeared thoughtful, constitutional, deliberate. Yet beneath that polished exterior lay a man constantly balancing internal party factions, donor expectations, and the illusion of moral coherence. It was precisely that tension, between image and reality, that Jasmine Crockett had just illuminated under the unrelenting glare of the committee's cameras. His communication approach typically merged references to founding principles with expressions of ethical assurance, a technique that had proven successful in building confidence with both traditional Republican establishment personalities and emerging populist factions. Johnson's effectiveness stems from his capacity to frame political calculations as constitutional imperatives. One congressional analyst had privately observed by casting partisan stances in the vocabulary of founding values rather than practical politics, He constructs a narrative that elevates policy, preferences to moral mandates, and renders opposition appear not simply mistaken, but constitutionally objectionable. The Oversight Committee hearing had been assembled, on abbreviated notice following Johnson's unanticipated proclamation that he would not advance the bipartisan border security framework to the floor, notwithstanding months of negotiations and his own earlier expressions of approval. The precipitous reversal had generated substantial controversy, with framework advocates suggesting that external coercion, rather than substantive objections, had propelled the determination. The hearing was ostensibly concentrated on the comprehensive government funding mechanism, but Johnson's determination on the border legislation had become its focal point, given both the timing and the wider ramifications for national security policy and congressional operation. During the initial 40 minutes of the hearing, Johnson had sustained a stance of principled decision-making, repeatedly characterizing his reversal as propelled by constitutional concerns, rather than external pressure or political calculations. He had specifically and categorically refuted any influence from donor organizations or confidential commitments, framing such allegations as partisan endeavors to divert attention from substantive policy disagreements. Allow me to state this without ambiguity. He had declared with rehearsed certainty, "My determination was predicated exclusively on policy considerations and the constitutional principles I have consistently championed throughout my career. Any suggestion of external influence or private commitments is not only erroneous, but a desperate partisan attempt to distract from the substantive policy disagreements at stake." This framing characterizing his stance as principled and opposition as partisan reflected Johnson's customary approach of elevating political determinations to constitutional imperatives by suggesting his reversal stemmed from constitutional examination rather than political pressure. He had attempted to position his determination beyond routine political criticism and frame skepticism as assaulting his integrity rather than questioning his judgment. "I have invariably operated with complete transparency," he had insisted as his opening statement concluded. "My positions are driven by constitutional principles in the best interests of the American people, not by private agendas or special interests." The categorical nature of this denial, specifically rejecting any influence from private agendas or special interests, would prove particularly problematic given the documentary evidence Crockett had methodically assembled before the hearing. By categorically dismissing any external influence rather than acknowledging routine stakeholder input, Johnson had created a factual claim that could be directly contradicted by specific evidence, rather than merely challenged through competing interpretation. As committee members commenced their questioning, the familiar partisan pattern initially materialized, with Republicans praising Johnson's principled leadership and Democrats expressing skepticism about the timing and rationale for his reversal, without introducing substantive new information. The questioning appeared unlikely to generate significant revelations beyond the established talking points from both sides. Then came Representative Crockett's turn, and her approach immediately signaled a different strategy than the rhetorical confrontation or general skepticism that had characterized previous Democratic questioning. Rather than commencing with accusatory framing or broad criticism, she focused initially on establishing a factual timeline that Johnson could not reasonably contest. "Mr. Speaker, I appreciate your testimony about constitutional principles guiding your decision," she began with deceptive mildness that gave no indication of their revelations to follow. "Before I ask about specific communications, I'd like to establish a factual timeline." This opening approach, focusing on chronology rather than motivation, reflected a litigation strategy of establishing undisputed contextual facts before introducing more controversial evidence by displaying a simple timeline showing Johnson's evolving statements on the border framework. Crockett had created a factual foundation that highlighted the dramatic shift in position without initially suggesting improper motivation. On January 12th, you stated you were cautiously optimistic about the framework. On January 25th, you said you were encouraged by the progress. Then, on February 2nd, you declared the same framework dead on arrival. Is this timeline accurate? The specificity of the dates and direct quotes presented a clarifying question, rather than an accusation, made simple denial difficult while establishing the rapid nature of Johnson's reversal as an objective fact rather than a partisan characterization. Securing his acknowledgement of this timeline, Crockett had established a critical foundation for her subsequent revelations about what occurred between his supportive statement and sudden opposition. Johnson's response, acknowledging the general accuracy while suggesting missing context, provided the perfect transition to Crockett's methodical introduction of precisely such context, though not the type he had likely anticipated. "Let's add some context then," she continued with the same measured tone that gave no indication of the bombshell to follow. I've obtained visitor logs showing that on January 31st, the day before your reversal, you had a private meeting with representatives from the Heritage Foundation and 3 major donors who'd publicly opposed the border framework. The introduction of the visitor logs official government, records rather than anonymous sources or partisan allegations shifted the discussion from competing characterizations to documented facts by specifically identifying both the timing, the day before his reversal, participants, Heritage Foundation representatives and donors who opposed the framework. Crockett had established a factual connection that contradicted Johnson's portrayal of a decision based solely on constitutional analysis without external influence. Johnson's response, acknowledging the meeting but characterizing it as a general policy discussion not specifically focused on the border framework, created the opening for Crockett's subsequent revelation that would directly contradict this characterization with documentary evidence. That's interesting, Mr. Speaker, because I've also obtained the meeting agenda circulated to participants, she continued, displaying a document titled Strategy Session, stopping the border compromise with Johnson's name listed as a participant. The meeting agenda, with its explicit focus on stopping the border compromise rather than generally discussing policy, directly contradicted Johnson's characterization of the meeting, while establishing that it was specifically convened to coordinate opposition to the framework he had previously supported. The document's title and the inclusion of Johnson's name as a participant made it denying its relevance to his decision increasingly difficult, particularly given the meeting's timing the day before his public reversal. As gasps and murmurs filled the committee room at this contradiction of Johnson's characterization, Crockett continued with deadly precision to her most devastating revelation. But perhaps most concerning is this mail sent by you at 9:47 p.m. following that meeting. The display of the email with its explicit subject line commitment, secured and content directly linking funding commitments to his public position on the border framework represented the culmination of Crockett's methodical evidence presentation. By showing Johnson's own words explicitly stating, "I will publicly cite constitutional concerns rather than specific policy objections." After confirming the framework would not move forward, Crockett had presented documentary evidence that directly contradicted his testimony about both his decision-making process and his categorical denial of external influence. The committee room erupted in chaos as Johnson's composed demeanor completely collapsed in the face of this unexpected documentary evidence. That's not, where did you get that?" he sputtered, his previous confident certainty replaced by visible shock and increasing agitation. "This is outrageous. That email is clearly fabricated." Crockett's calm response to his accusation of fabrication demonstrated the thoroughness of her preparation. Email was provided by a recipient who was concerned about its ethical implications. Its authenticity has been verified by digital forensic experts, and the metadata confirms it originated from your government account. I have submitted the original digital files to the committee, including full header information and authentication certification from 2 independent forensic analysts. By specifically addressing the authentication process, including metadata verification, digital forensic analysis, and independent certification, Crockett had anticipated and preemptively addressed the natural defense of claiming fabrication. Their reference to submitting original digital files with full header information to the committee established that this wasn't a mere image or screenshot, but complete digital evidence with technical metadata that could confirm its authenticity. As Johnson continued increasingly agitated denials, Crockett delivered her final revelation. "I should also note that 3 other recipients of this email have provided sworn affidavit confirming its authenticity, along with additional communications detailing specific funding commitments made in exchange for killing the border legislation. Those materials have been provided to the appropriate ethics authorities given their implications for campaign finance regulations." Their reference to multiple sworn affidavit from other recipients along with additional corroborating communications and their submission to ethics authorities completed a systematic dismantling of Johnson's defense. By establishing multiple independent sources of verification beyond just the email itself, Crockett had created a web of evidence that made continued denial increasingly implausible while suggesting broader legal implications beyond just political embarrassment. The complete reversal from Johnson, confidently dismissing allegations of external influence to being confronted with documented evidence of precisely such coordination, created what political observers would later describe as one of the most dramatic moments of accountability in recent congressional history. As the speaker continued his increasingly incoherent denials in the face of methodically presented evidence, the hearing devolved into procedural chaos that only highlighted the devastating impact of Crockett's revelations. What we just witnessed wasn't merely effective questioning, said one veteran oversight expert afterward. It was a masterclass in evidence-based accountability. Representative Crockett clearly had methodically gathered and authenticated multiple forms of documentary evidence, established a clear factual timeline before introducing controversial material, anticipated likely defenses, and prepared authentication that made a simple denial ineffective. That level of thorough preparation combined with strategic discipline in presentation created a moment of genuine accountability that political spin or procedural maneuvering couldn't easily neutralize. By evening, the email and meeting agenda had spread across media platforms like wildfire, with legal analysts and political observers noting both the substantive implications for understanding the abandoned border legislation and the broader questions about undisclosed influences on national security decision-making. This revelation raises profound questions about governance transparency, observed one congressional ethics expert. When public officials privately make commitments in exchange for financial support, while publicly citing entirely different justifications, it undermines basic democratic accountability. What made this moment so significant wasn't just the political embarrassment, but how it exposed the gap between public justifications and private arrangements that can distort critical policy decisions, particularly on matters of national security. For congressional observers, the exchange highlighted the crucial importance of document-based oversight rather than relying on testimony alone. What made this revelation so powerful wasn't just the contradiction of Johnson's testimony, explained one former committee counsel, but how the documentary evidence established not just what happened, but the explicit intent to mislead about motivations. By obtaining communications that specifically discussed creating a false public justification, Crockett exposed not just external influence, but the deliberate strategy to conceal that influence from public accountability. That kind of evidence goes beyond routine political criticism to fundamental questions about governance integrity. The political fallout was immediate and substantial. By the following day, calls for ethics investigations had emerged from across the political spectrum, with even some members of Johnson's own party expressing concern about the implications of the revealed communications. Several donors mentioned in the materials issued carefully worded statements, neither confirming nor denying the specific allegations, but emphasizing their appropriate engagement in policy advocacy. While ethics watchdogs filed formal complaints with both congressional ethics committees and federal election authorities, citing potential campaign finance violations, Johnson himself issued a statement, claiming the materials had been presented without proper context and suggesting they represented routine stakeholder communications being mischaracterized for partisan purposes. Notably absent from this statement was any repetition of his hearing claim that the email had been fabricated, suggesting recognition that challenging its authenticity would be difficult given the forensic verification Crockett had referenced. For Representative Crockett, the hearing reinforced her growing reputation as one of the most effective oversight practitioners in Congress, despite her junior status. What made her approach particularly powerful was that it wasn't based on partisan rhetoric or personal attacks, but on methodic evidence development and strategic presentation qualities that resonated with independent observers concerned with governmental integrity, regardless of partisan alignment. Yesterday's hearing highlighted the fundamental importance of evidence-based oversight in our constitutional system. Crockett said in a brief statement afterward, "When public officials provide explanations for consequential decisions affecting national security, the American people deserve accurate information about the actual factors driving those choices. Documentary evidence that contradicts public justifications raises legitimate concerns that transcend ordinary policy disagreements to questions of governmental transparency and democratic accountability." The impact of the exchange extended beyond the immediate political controversy to broader discussions about transparency and governance and the role of undisclosed influences in shaping public policy. Several congressional committees announced plans to examine their disclosure requirements for meetings with outside groups on pending legislation, while government reform organizations highlighted the incidentus, demonstrating the need for stronger transparency. Requirements regarding external communications on major policy decisions What Representative Crockett demonstrated goes beyond any single hearing or controversy, noted one government ethics expert. She showed how thorough investigative work and strategic evidence presentation can pierce the carefully managed narratives that often obscure the actual decision-making processes in Washington. That approach doesn't just create momentary political embarrassment. It potentially strengthens democratic accountability by making it harder for officials to maintain completely separate public and private justifications for consequential decisions affecting national welfare. The story of Mike Johnson's meltdown after Jasmine Crockett exposed his hidden dealings serves as a powerful reminder of how methodical evidence gathering and strategic presentation can transform political accountability. It demonstrated that, sometimes, the most effective oversight doesn't come from rhetorical confrontation or partisan accusations, but from carefully authenticated documentation that contradicts public narratives, thereby providing citizens with insight into the actual factors shaping critical policy decisions that affect national security and governmental function. If you found this breakdown of one of the most dramatic moments of congressional accountability in recent memory informative, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our in-depth analysis of revealing oversight hearings and the documentary evidence that sometimes exposes the gap between public justifications and private arrangements. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on transparency and governance and the importance of evidence-based accountability in ensuring that citizens understand the actual factors driving consequential decisions on matters of national importance.